Henry VIII is known for being one of the most brutal kings in history. It was during his 4-decade-long reign that 70,000 people were executed inside of England, and he changed the country forever. One of the most shocking policies he imposed was the dissolutions of the monasteries, in which Thomas Cromwell was placed in charge of making the king incredibly rich. He did this by seizing huge amounts of land and wealth from the monasteries, abbeys and religious houses across England that were then closed down. With this, Henry VIII became very rich following the suppression, and the income and assets along with the land fell into the royal coffers. Henry VIII also sold off much of the land for his military campaigns in Europe, and the dissolution changed England forever, and it showed Henry VIII for being a brutal dictator and being a very savage man. The huge theft of land did not go down well with many people, and the Pilgrimage of Grace rose up in the north against Henry VIII's changes. Cromwell was put in charge of getting rid of the monasteries, and in 4 years he shut down over 800 of them, including abbeys, nunneries and other religious houses. This made thousands of monks and nuns homeless, and those who refused to leave and give up their way of life were often placed in prisons and tortured. But there was one man who was rather powerful and senior in Somerset and the local church. Richard Whiting was the abbot of Glastonbury Abbey, who was brutally executed following his opposition. Join us today as we look at his execution, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Richard Whiting was born around 1460, and this was when the Wars of the Roses were gripping the nation. The crown was being passed from House of Lancaster to the House of York, but whilst this was happening, Whiting was educated at Glastonbury Abbey, and he then studied at Cambridge University and graduated in 1483. After graduating, he became a priest and rose to the position of a deacon. He was a very skilled and intelligent man and obtained a doctorate at university, and he then worked as a chamberlain of Glastonbury Abbey, and he was in control of different parts of the monastic building. In February 1525, the abbot of Glastonbury Abbey, Richard Beer, died, and with this the monks living there had to choose their next abbot. They appealed to Cardinal Wolsey to choose for them, and he chose Richard Whiting the chamberlain, and he was classed as an upright and religious monk, a provident and discreet man, and a priest commendable for his life, virtues and learning. So Whiting's reputation had reached Henry VIII's right-hand man Wolsey, and he was deemed the most ideal man for the job. Inside of Glastonbury Abbey, he lived the normal life of an abbot, and his house was seen as one of the most profitable and richest monastic houses in England. This made it a target when the dissolutions of the monasteries came about, and it was one of the highest incomes of any monastery in England. Whiting himself, despite being a holy man, enjoyed hunting, and he was known for mixing with royalty in Henry VIII's court, and he also sent many gifts to the king. Whilst he was an abbot, he carried out significant renovations and building work at Glastonbury Abbey, and he then added another chapel in the east part of the church. He was considered a joyous man who helped the poor, and instigated a policy where twice a week the doors of the abbey would be opened to feed the poor in the local area, and he also increased the number of monks. But at the time Henry VIII was getting fed up with his wife, Catherine of Aragon, and his eye had been captured by Anne Boleyn at court. The Pope refused to grant the king his divorce or annulment that he wanted, and this greatly frustrated the English king. Because of this, Henry broke from Rome and turned his back on the Pope, declaring himself the supreme head of the Church of England. He then was seen as the ultimate authority of the Church, and his changes offended many Catholics across the country. Richard Whiting, the abbot of Glastonbury Abbey before this, had appealed to the king to help, and he said he would try and speak with the Pope for help, before Henry did anything drastic and rash. But it was Thomas Cromwell's rise to power that changed things massively. Cromwell would become the king's chief advisor, and he quickly moved against Catholics and also the monastic houses. He suspended the power and authority of all the bishops in England, and then employed a number of lawyers who would survey the monasteries. These would have 86 questions to fill out, and they would then attend the monastery and look at every element. If there was one thing which was out of the ordinary or was deemed to have been unholy, then the whole of the monastery would be shut down, and the order would be outlawed, making the monks and nuns completely homeless. The crown would then seize the house, the land, and the riches, and this was the excuse they needed to shut down any abbey. After the investigations there was nothing found that was out of the ordinary at Glastonbury Abbey, but there were a number of rumours of other abbeys. One abbot was known for stealing from the church and selling the valuables of his abbey, and another was known for lying with women from the stew houses. One abbot was even found in bed with a woman at 11 o'clock on a Friday morning when the investigators called round. Another was described as the drunkest knave living, and with this Cromwell issued the dissolutions of the monastery, and with this obtained royal approval to shut down many religious houses. All homes with an annual income less than £200 were suppressed to begin with, and Richard Whiting was told his abbey would be safe. However, in 1538, Cromwell's men attended the abbey again for another look, and they started to knock Whiting's leadership of the house, and they said that some of the monks had fallen out. He was seen as a man who often neglected his responsibilities, as he lived in manors away from the abbey a large amount of time. But by January 1539, Glastonbury Abbey was considered the only monastery in Somerset, and the rest had been shut down and absorbed into the king's wealth, and the monks were made homeless. On the 19th of September, the royal commissioners arrived at the abbey without prior warning, and Richard Whiting the abbot was away. They walked into the building, ransacked his apartments, and took many papers as evidence. They tried to find anything to shut the abbey down with, and Whiting arrived, and it was said he was dissenting against the king. The investigators found alleged papers containing arguments against Henry VIII's divorce, and with this he was sent to the Tower of London. Whilst here he was held in the place of torture in a significant amount of distress. He was an elderly and frail man, and Cromwell himself interrogated him on a charge that we must assume was probably treason. Whiting, it was found, was hiding objects from Cromwell's men, and they found gold plate and money hidden inside vaults and chambers. With this it was used as evidence of the abbot being guilty of treason. He was not allowed a trial to begin with, and was condemned without any trial as he deliberately prevented Cromwell's investigators from doing their job. Cromwell wrote how the Abbot of Glaston to be tried at Glastonbury and also executed there with his accomplices. But a French ambassador wrote how he has lately been up in the Tower in taking the abbey's treasures, valued at 200,000 crowns. They found a book of arguments on behalf of Queen Catherine. Whiting was also a member of the House of Lords, and he should have been given a fair trial, or have been sentenced to death by an act of attainder, giving the king permission to execute him with no questions asked. But his hastily organised execution happened before Parliament was given the chance to meet and discuss. At the age of around 80, Richard Whiting, the last abbot of Glastonbury Abbey, was taken to Somerset from the Tower of London on the 14th of November 1539. A trial rushed his death sentence, and he was not allowed any time to recover from his journey before he was then put to death. Some of his closest friends turned against him to save themselves, and the trial was a sham, and Whiting was condemned as Cromwell had already established guilt. On the 15th of November, on the next day, he along with two of his monks, who were part of his abbey, were dragged through the streets of Glastonbury. He was a local man, and he would have walked these streets plenty of times, and he was then tied behind the back of horses on a hurdle, and he was taken through the streets on show. Following this he was taken up to his abbey, which was empty as it had been dissolved, and he was then taken up to Glastonbury Tor for his execution. The horses took him up to the top of the Tor, a hill overlooking the town, and then Richard Whiting was brutally executed. Whilst he was on top of the hill, he was taken up to a gallows which had been created. The three then waited patiently for their deaths, and Richard Whiting, the 80-year-old abbot, was handed over to the executioner. He was hanged from a gallows until almost dead, and then his almost lifeless body was cut down. He was then beheaded by the executioner in a swift blow, and then his corpse was cut into 4 different pieces, as he was hanged, drawn and quartered. Henry VIII ordered his body parts to be sent to towns and villages nearby for display, and these were shown in Wells, Bath, Ilchester and Bridgewater. Whiting's head was then placed on a pike above Glastonbury Abbey, his former home, which was now a ruin of what it previously was. Glastonbury Abbey was one of the final monasteries dissolved, and with this the king got very rich, as the abbey held significant wealth. The abbey was a place of relief for the poor in the area, but Richard Whiting, the last abbot of Glastonbury Abbey, was executed in horrific fashion. It was killings like this that ensured Henry VIII's legacy was a brutal one. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.